I presume you know that the chaff that is burned away are not people. Hopefully we have that understanding. This could get dangerous from here if you don't. I want to share with you a little bit this morning about peace and the quest for peace. It probably won't be anything you haven't heard. Maybe I'll say it in a different way, or maybe there'll be something that strikes you in a different way this morning. And I think that we've certainly seen quite a bit of effort around here this week in terms of cultivating peace. The quarter auction, the Santa bags, and the Christmas store. I was sitting there in my office, nice and warm in there, and there's a TV in there. I don't know if anybody's seen my TV. It has 4 quadrants. I could see different places in the church, and so it's pretty awesome, and I'm here by myself, and get to know if there's anybody around, or like ghosts. Sometimes the lights just come on and stuff like that. I'm going like, oh my God, maybe I should leave. There's this big long line up out the door, right, for the Christmas store, and I watched them for a couple of hours before the doors were opened and they could be let in. And I was thinking about that as a peace movement in some ways. I'm thinking about that in terms of how we understand peace. Basic needs are essential for people to survive. But I wondered what it would mean for people to go on from that lineup thriving. They would need to be able to be seen as more than the sum of their challenges and their barriers. They need to be able to create, to share, to give, to participate in meaningful ways. The whole movement of peace, the whole work of charity, moving into justice is about being incomplete as a people. So I want to talk to you a little bit about peace today. Peace as something elusive, peace as something personal, peace as something public. And because it's a heavy topic, I thought that we should begin with an outside voice. Peace is a pretty heavy topic. Huh? Absolutely. Anybody thought of peace here? Who would you bring as your example of non-peace? A story, a clip. I have one for you. You don't even have to think about it. This one comes from my childhood, and I think a lot of our childhoods. So we're going to watch this, about 4 minutes long. I think you'd get a kick out of it, and it helped to put peace into perspective. So do we have that? We're going to attempt it. If not, I'm going to have to tell you about it, which is worse. Is there sound on it? Is there sound? Well, let me tell you, I know this story down pat. Anybody recognize this? Ernie and Bert in bed? Huh? What's on the background? Ernie? You hear that?
Dripping faucet.
It's a tap. Can you fix that, Ernie? It's just a tap, Ernie. It's just a tap, Bert. Can you go and fix the tap for me? Sure, Bert. I can do that.
Do something about the sound of that water dripping out.
Turns on the jazz. Can't hear the tap now dripping, can you, Bert? He's going to fix the really loud jazz. Vacuum cleaner. Can't hear the jazz now, can you, Bert? Bert's going to fix the problem. Tap's still going. And then what happens? Ernie, you're snoring. Says it all, doesn't it? Anybody else remember that from their childhood?
Yes.
Anybody?
Yep.
Half. Oh my gosh. You know, oftentimes fatigue and bed are not just enough, eh? To set the stage for a fit night's sleep. Bert is tortured and he's deprived by a solitary and proverbial dripping tap. Desperate for peace and quiet in order to sleep, he kind of gets frustrated by the dripping tap, turns to Ernie, and Ernie seems more inclined perhaps to pass the steady plop as the sound of a water feature in the house, eh? He's a good gardener or landscaper or something. Because he's such a good guy, Ernie is willing to get out of bed, and he's willing to accommodate his good buddy when asked to fix the problem. So he does so twice. Both times he makes sleep more elusive for his roommate. You know, this story stuck like a hungry leech in my imagination from the time I was a kid. And every once in a while I noticed the little sucker. Like I did again this week. The clip introduces us to the theme of peace. Peace evades the world most of the time. It especially escapes humans like Ernie and Bert. And it escapes us as well, you and I. Harmony is elusive. Unity is always tenuous. Keep calm is a reminder on a t-shirt and a directive that ends up sounding ambivalent depending upon who says it or in what context. I was looking at, the Keep Calm t-shirts. It says, there's a picture of a stormtrooper on it. It says, keep calm and move on, move on, move on. Yes, whoever says it, whoever says peace, means something different in the context it comes from, it ends up sounding ambivalent when it comes from a stormtrooper. The clip also reminds us of our inkling that there may be many layers to the quest of peace, right? Many layers, and many aspects that quench its presence. The clip also reminds us of our attempts to sustain peace through misattempts, which gets kind of funny with Bernie and Ert. Good old Ernie thinks jazz music is the answer, or running the vacuum, and one covers up the issue in the very pursuit of peace. I wonder if anybody of you have ever heard of Bowen's theory of triangulation. Anybody? Bowen's theory of triangulation. And there you go. Not strangulation, triangulation. It was kind of the same thing in some ways, but so Bowen was a psychologist, sociologist, counselor who developed this theory about how families and communities work together, operate together, live together, create life together, and what families and communities do when tensions rise between two people or two parties. Recognize the scenario? Anybody? Two people have a tension between them, or two parties have tension between them, and they reach out to a third person or to a third party. They're brought into the equation to help restore equilibrium in the family or in the group, and because peace is really important, and they establish equanimity or equality in the triangle between two people, and the weaker of those three people after the third one's brought in becomes the weaker point in the triangle. So we have shifting sides of a triangle where two people are always in harmony with each other or strengthened by each other, and a third person who's been brought in to help achieve that feels on the outside. And Bowen thought that most of our families and most of our groups operated like that. And sometimes in a triangle, you do have two people or two groups that actually do bring strength to the whole triangle. But sometimes those triangles are used to actually help two people gain strength at the expense of a third. So when tensions rise between two people, a third person is brought in, and it creates strength while isolating the third. Power and strength shift with a change of solidarity. And reading a bit beyond this passage that we read with Isaiah about the stump, it was pretty interesting, really, because we see that Judah will rise up like a shoot, and it joins later on in the passage Ephraim, another nation, and it gains enough strength to have peace between them, and they go to fight the Philistines. They will plunder them instead of them being plundered for a change. It's like tuning in on jazz or turning the vacuum on to hide the faucet dripping that's just in the other room. Peace is covered up by the sound of another element. Our attempts of securing peace are merely triangles or cover-ups that hide peace even more. So what do you think about that in the scripture, eh? One of our standard scriptures around peace ends up bringing in this third party and helps to create more peace between old rivals of Judah and Ephraim. And now the Philistines are on the outside. Well, they've always been on the outside, as the case may be, but this time these two have really gained enough strength to feel as though they can attack the Philistines, and that's how they're going to live out their peace. You know, when we talk about peace as something that's elusive and evasive, it just doesn't elude us in our generation. It just doesn't evade us in our generation. It evades even the people in an ancient world. It evades even a prophet whose vision is incomplete. it's incomplete. Peace, it seems like, needs to evolve. It needs to evolve to a point where it's not just something shared between two parties, it's not just something exclusive, but peace is seen as being something God doing something new in the midst of our world, being revealed in a different way. Anybody here? Anybody hear of or read the book The Break by Katharina Vermette? The Break, story about the Métis in just outside of Winnipeg. It's a hard group to belong to. If you start putting yourself into the role of the Métis historically, not really being inside the power dynamics of a triangle, but really always being on the outside because you never really fit into what was a proper human being. You weren't native, you weren't English or French, you were something else all the time, right? They felt as though they didn't really have a place in Canada, even though they were so much a part of Canada. So in the novel The Break by Katharina Vermette, she shares the story of this community plagued by racism, plagued by poverty, plagued by broken families, plagued by lost identity. They have children who, in the midst of all those cycles of damage, can't seem to help not getting caught up as a way of securing something of safety in their lives by aligning themselves with another group. They start to really become involved, whether they want to or not, in gangs. And that takes them further into drugs, further into poverty, and just really exacerbates the whole process of making peace something so distant from the community. Parents lament deeply the loss of their beautiful children and can do little to stop the trend. Triangles align the weak with the stronger, but the cost is always high. And it isn't many years from the time we laugh at Bert's plight and Ernie's cover-ups until we enter into the real cycles of prejudice and poverty and abuse and disregard that overwhelm the prospect of peace at every corner. Anger and intolerance create systems where understanding is never correct. Anger and intolerance create systems where understanding is never correct. Those are reflections of Mahatma Gandhi, by the way. The dream of peace has been alive for so long. The dream of Isaiah, the dream of Bert and Ernie, the dream of John the Baptist and Jesus himself, a dream for peace sticks like a leech. There is something about the quest for peace that keeps its lifeblood running just near the surface of our lives. In Advent, we notice again the Prince of Peace, and we yearn to set our lives at the feet of our great teacher. So if cover-ups and triangles and Ernie and Bert are ways of revealing our tendency toward getting a peaceful night's sleep or not getting a peaceful night's sleep, there are other practices we might turn to help us cultivate peace. How are we doing for time here? Not good. All of a sudden, I realize I spent too much time on my preamble. Quickly. Personal peace. Mindfulness, meditation, prayer, spiritual direction, study of the ministry of Jesus, practices that help cultivate peace in ourselves, right? We know those, we recognize them, we've heard of them before. We have opportunities to invite peace into our lives. We sometimes get suspicious of people who say they meditate or they pray or have mindful practices, or they enter into spiritual direction, or they study the scriptures. We think that sometimes they are just navel-gazing. And we use that word, right? Navel-gazing. Finding the path of peace isn't about going the personal route. Yet in the history of those who went into the desert to seek the Spirit, there is a practice of community there. There's a practice of hospitality and prayer, communally and as individuals, as a way of raising one's consciousness about life and how God moves us to confront greed and security and the ego. It's that personal practice of prayerfulness and mindfulness as a way of engaging in peace is a powerful way. In the Course of Miracles, which is a little study, not a little study, it's a long study actually. Anybody here ever look at the Course of Miracles? It's a wonderful, perplexing read. But one of the challenges the Course of Miracles says to us about peace is that we are only one step, one barrier away from achieving peace. Christ moves over the small grudge of bitterness and hurt with us. If we could see ourselves moving with Christ over the smallest of barriers, we'll be taught that what we need to shed most as we seek peace is our resistance to seeking peace. Peace has its origin in one's mind. Let the Prince of Peace make the way of peace for us. And we follow. Course of Miracles. The thing we need to resist the most is our resistance to peace itself. You know, the personal practice of peace is not easy. It's not merely navel-gazing. It's trusting despite grudges and anger and greed and old memories and old wounds that our minds are obsessed with. Following the divinity in us, the creator of us, is to pray for courage before the one who is obsessed with helping us free our misperceptions and prejudgments that erupt from the past. We are created to see and enter life anew. Our practice of peace may well emerge from personal devotion, and it will challenge every sense of entitlement and self-judgment that blocks us from divine life. The internal revolution seeps into our relationships. Other people say that the peace is actually cultivated in public, and some people really find that path to be the way to go. Jimmy Carter is one of my examples of someone who's practiced peace in real, live ways. Other people might say Martin Luther King Jr., who taught about equity between people, or Mother Teresa, who talked about being vulnerable as a way of peace, or Archbishop Oscar Romero as saying the church can't sidestep justice in the quest for peace. Comedian Russell Peters, I believe, talks about peace in lots of different ways. Anybody else see Russell Peters? Oh my gosh, if you want to be offended, you can watch him, but he's also a great peacemaker and a peace lover, I believe. So many other saints and family members have steeped you and I in the path of peace. They've helped us in some ways be converted. Remember Micah's mantra and sung refrain a couple of weeks ago? To seek justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. Peace is learned only through experimentation, Micah would say. Peace is only learned through seeking justice, loving kindness, walking humbly and seeing where that takes you. Peace is only learned through experimentation, reflection, and dialogue. Peace is quite public. Jimmy Carter says that his greatest goal in life was not to be President of the United States. Lots of people say he failed in that. He says his life will be a success when he outlives the last Getty worm, which is a long white worm that comes out I think it has like a 2-year gestation in people's legs, and it's very painful. Starts to come out in the second year, and you wrap it up like this, and you kind of pull it out of the body. It's very, very painful, and it's very treatable. So his great goal in life is to outlive the Getty worm, and he says there's no reason for that to be a problem still. So Jimmy Carter achieves this by building latrines in impoverished communities. Peace has worked out for him in the public realm. It's not just something that happens with the eradication of the Getty worm. The process of peace is a path and something each generation travels down. Peace is not achieved fully when Carter dies. We continue on in the work. Peace is a process. Carter helped me frame peace in that way, in a helpful way, as something that's learned, something that comes to consciousness in increments. Peace crosses every boundary, and peace is worked out in very public ways. Peace is about continuing the work of creation. It's been going on for centuries. Mahatma Gandhi said, "I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and nonviolence are as old as the hills. All I have done is try to experiment in both vast and small scales, but as vast scales as I could. Peace is a path we share, and we have shared it with many. And one of the great teachers is the one we proclaim as being born among us." Ernie and Bert say, peace is elusive. And it's good to know that we have their good company. And it's also good to know that we have good company in our saints. Let us celebrate and rejoice in this day of peacemaking and learning. Amen.